Number 10. Narco submarine. A narco submarine was found in the middle of the Ecuadorian jungle, and strangely, it's not even the first time it's happened. Agents with the DEA and the Ecuadorian police stumbled upon the thing near the Esmeraldas area of Ecuador, near the border of Colombia. The submarine itself is nearly 100 feet long, built from fiberglass, and painted in camouflage. According to the regional director of the DEA, Jay Bergman, it was the first fully submersible and operational submarine that they found capable of transoceanic trips. What this means is that drug movers in South America are getting significantly more creative. They must have been using the submarine to transport cocaine from Ecuador to America underwater, successfully avoiding any law enforcement agencies. Of course, they didn't just find it in the middle of nowhere in the jungle. It was a coastal cove where drug smugglers had been storing illicit substances. The police also found electrical machinery and welding equipment, suggesting the drug smugglers had built the submarine right there in the jungle, like some Pablo Escobar version of Iron Man. Number 9. Girl in the glass coffin. In San Francisco, a construction crew working at a home near the University of San Francisco discovered a sealed casket buried beneath the backyard. A contractor was remodeling the home of John and Erica Carner when they made the gruesome discovery. As it turned out, the property had once been a part of the Oddfellows Cemetery in the 1800s. On October 13, 1876, a young girl named Edith Howard Cook died and was buried here in the family plot. But through the years, the plot was forgotten. The bodies buried here were forgotten as well, and the house was built on the land. The residents had no idea they were living on top of a graveyard. The girl's identity was found out because investigators were able to go through the funeral home records. They uncovered that the young girl had died from something they called marasmus in the 1800s. It was basically malnourishment, usually caused by the child not getting the proper nutrients needed to stay alive, or even by an infectious disease. Number 8. Parking lot cemetery. While we're on the topic of lost cemeteries, let's check out another one. More human remains were discovered by accident underneath a parking lot in Philadelphia. The parking lot belonged to a strip mall. During construction, workers were shocked when they uncovered unknown graves beneath where people had been parking their cars to go shopping for over 50 years. There was a dollar store in the mall, a nail salon, and a beer store. But in 1832, this place was home to a Methodist church and a small cemetery where members of the church were buried. This is according to historic maps of the area. In the late 1800s, most of the graves were dug up and the bodies were placed in a new cemetery, but clearly, some of the graves had been missed. In total, only a handful of coffins were found. The remains were then documented, excavated, and transferred to the campus of the Rutgers University to be placed in storage before they can be properly buried yet again at a new cemetery, hopefully for a bit longer this time. Number 7. A chicken head. Here's an accidental discovery you're glad you didn't find. In the UK, a shopper purchased a bag of frozen wings. What she got instead was the decapitated head of a chicken. I mean, the wings were indeed still there. The head was more of an added extra that she didn't want and definitely did not expect. When she opened the bag, excited to make some yummy chicken wings for dinner, she instead found the dull gray eyes of a chicken staring back at her. Its beak, its eyeballs, and a chunk of its neck had been left inside the bag. To make things even more horrifying, the shopper said it wasn't the first time this happened. Just 2 weeks before, she had purchased the same brand of chicken wings and discovered a chicken head. You would have thought that after the first discovery, she would have stopped buying from the brand. But now she has 2 chicken heads and 2 bags of tainted wings. Whether she ate the wings or not, we don't actually know. Would you still eat them? Personally, I would. But then again, I'm Filipino. Number 6. A secret tunnel. A man in Illinois made a bizarre accidental discovery beneath his property. Gary Machins noticed the sidewalk outside his home was starting to slope in a weird position. So the natural thing to do was excavate the sidewalk and repack the rock underneath, right? But when construction started, Gary found that the reason the sidewalk was sloping was that it had been built over a secret tunnel. The tunnel had been put there years ago, sometime around the year 1840. According to Gary himself, this was no measly tunnel. It took a lot of men, a lot of hours to build it, but he doesn't actually know what it was used for. It could have been part of the Underground Railroad, it could have been used for ice storage, or it could have been a horrible murder dungeon. The only maps Gary has been able to find of his area go back to 1863, to a time when there was no house on the property. Nothing was found inside of the tunnel, so there's no possible way of knowing what it was once used for. That being said, the tunnel is about 9 feet tall and goes on for about 60 feet, so it must have been used for something important. What do you think the tunnel was used for? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Too many bowling balls. David Olson needed to get rid of the cement steps leading to his back porch. They are beginning to crumble and were getting more dangerous, so he used one of his free days to break them apart with a sledgehammer and fix them himself. When he yanked the first one out, he was shocked to see that beneath the steps was not a foundation of dirt or sand. They were sitting on bowling balls. What the Throughout a single afternoon, David discovered 158 bowling balls, most of them looking as though they had never played a game in their life, beneath his house and yard. He took to social media with his bizarre accidental discovery to find out where the bowling balls had come from and why they were all buried on his property. As it turns out, his home of Brunswick, Michigan once had a manufacturing plant for bowling balls and billiard balls. This was way back in the early 1900s. The quality assurance was done by hand. Workers at the plant used a trampoline to test the bowling balls to make sure they were perfect. Whenever one of them wasn't quite right, it was tossed in the dumpster, and because this was around the 1950s, people were allowed to take what they wanted from dumpsters for their own use. Whoever built David's house took the bowling balls to use as a rough foundation for part of the house instead of proper building materials. Number 4. A rare painting. A couple of restorers in England accidentally found a collection of paintings that had been made sometime between 1540 and 1580. The paintings are a little peculiar, of birds with teeth and men wearing tiny hats. But then again, that's not even all that unusual considering some of the other weird stuff being painted around 600 years ago. As for where the paintings were found, they were discovered behind a plaster wall during a restoration project at the Calverley Old Hall. This is an old manor located in Yorkshire going back to the days of Queen Elizabeth I. According to Anna Kay with the Landmark Trust, she had never, in her 27 years of restoring historic buildings, found such dramatic and exciting paintings. They were made in the grotesque style, which came out of Italy in the days of the Roman Emperor Nero. The paintings are now going to be restored and left exactly where they were found. Number 3. A new dinosaur. A new species of dinosaur has been discovered by accident, decades after its bones were first taken out of the ground. The ancient reptile has been named Bristonia simonsi, and it lived 125 million years before today. It was named after the town of Bryston in England, close to where it was found. The fossil of the creature was originally excavated in 1978, with a specimen being stored at a local museum for over 40 years. Its bones were forgotten about and locked in a drawer until Jeremy Lockwood, a student at London's Natural History Museum, got curious. He was examining the bones, not at all looking for a new species, when he realized he had never seen anything like them before. This intrigued Jeremy, and so he started really investigating. Thanks to this random discovery, we now know that the creature was an absolute beast, at least 26 feet long and over 2,200 pounds. But it wasn't a predator. It ate a diet primarily made up of pine needles and fern plants. Just imagine a creature bigger and scarier than an elephant, and all it ate to survive were pine needles. Number 2. Accidental Island. A team of researchers accidentally found the northernmost island in the entire world. What this means is that they discovered the island closest to the North Pole. Unsurprisingly, it happens to be north of Greenland. The discovery was made over this most recent summer when the team used the helicopter to fly across the most northern stretches of the world. They made a stop on Udak, the very island there was supposed to be the most north, but they had made a mistake. They overshot Udak and landed instead on a previously undiscovered piece of land over half a mile north. It isn't that big of an island or discovery, really. It's just funny that they accidentally landed on the wrong piece of land and incidentally found an island closer to the North Pole than Udak. The island is only about the size of a football field. It's 13 feet above sea level, and it's doubtful anyone else will ever visit this island during our lifetime since it's literally in the middle of nowhere. Number 1. Ancient Boomerangs. 5 rare non-returning boomerangs were found at the bottom of a dried-up riverbed in southern Australia. The only reason they were found in the first place is because of a terrible drought that caused the river system, normally filled with water, to completely go dry. When a woman was walking by the riverbed, she noticed what looked to be wooden artifacts sticking out of the dirt. Upon closer inspection, she realized they were boomerangs. That was when the archaeologists got involved, excavating one of the largest collections of boomerangs in Australia. The issue with these old artifacts is that they're almost always made of wood. This means they degrade extremely quickly. Ancient boomerangs are hard to come by, never mind 5 of them in the exact same place. The other big shock here is that these boomerangs were not designed to return to the person who threw them. Normally, if you throw a boomerang, it comes back to you, but in this case, it would have just been like throwing a curved stick. It's not clear what the Australian Aborigines may have used these for. They could have been tools for stoking fires, maybe they were used in hand-to-hand combat, or they could have been makeshift shovels. Radiocarbon dating shows that they date from between 1650 to 1830, before Europeans ever even made it to this part of Australia.
Number 9. The SS Sapana. The SS Sapana was a cargo ship that was made with concrete amid a steel shortage during World War I. It was built in Wilmington, North Carolina as part of a fleet that was commissioned by then-President Woodrow Wilson. The ships were meant to transport soldiers, but several of them, including the Sapana, weren't finished until after the war ended. The ship was sold for scrap to a developer in Miami Beach named Carl Fisher, who used it as a casino and then for oil storage. In 1924, he sold it to a British liquor merchant named Bruce Bethel, who relocated the vessel to the Bimini district of the Bahamas, just 50 miles, 80 kilometers, off the Florida coast. Nicknamed Bimini's Rum King, Bethel used the Sapana as a liquor warehouse and distribution center during the Prohibition era. Just 2 years later, the ship ran aground during a hurricane and was heavily damaged. It was left to decay in 15-foot deep, 4.6 meters water, with most of the wreck sticking out above the surface. During World War II, the U.S. Army Air Corps used the vessel as a training target for fighter jet pilots. The Sapana remains in its shallow grave today as a shell of its former self. Most of the concrete has worn away due to the military bombing exercises and the elements. The site is popular among scuba divers, snorkelers, and swimmers, some who are brave or perhaps crazy enough to make the 40-foot, 12.2 meters dive into the water from atop the ship. Number 8. The Sweepstakes. Built in Burlington, Ontario in 1867, the Sweepstakes is a 119-foot long, 36 meters wooden schooner that experienced a rather short life on the water. In 1885, the vessel's hull was damaged while transporting coal off Cove Island in Lake Huron. From there, it was towed to Big Tub Harbor for repairs. But it would have been costly to fix the ship, and it was deemed not worth saving. The Sweepstakes was stripped of valuables and simply left to sink. It plunged to its watery grave in 1885 with a cargo of coal still aboard, which was later removed. The ship sits under just 20 feet, 6.1 meters of water in the Fathom 5 National Marine Park in Ontario. It's a popular diving destination due to its accessibility and visibility, but there are limits to how close divers can get to the wreck. Despite being in remarkably good condition, the Sweepstakes is deteriorating, and it'll continue to do so. Parks Canada reinforced the hull and deck with metal bars, and the sunken vessel is surrounded by a wire fence to prevent divers from disturbing it. Even though it's starting to fall apart, the Sweepstakes is considered one of the best preserved 19th century Great Lakes schooners ever found. It resembled a typical example of one of these commercial sailing vessels, which were popular for being fast with a sizable cargo capacity. Schooners weren't the most impressive looking ships, but they got the job done efficiently, and that was all that mattered to shippers whose goal was to get their product to its destination. They were worked as hard as possible until they were no longer operational, at which point they were usually abandoned if they didn't wreck and sink first. Number 7. The Samson. In 2019, archaeologists unearthed the remains of a 16th century shipwreck beneath Kungsträd Garden Park in Stockholm, Sweden. Remnants of its wooden hull were discovered under a courtyard where the vessel went unnoticed for nearly 4 centuries beneath people's feet as they carried out their daily lives. In announcing the discovery, experts tentatively identified the ship as the Samson, a long-lost cargo vessel that was commissioned in 1590 by King Charles IX. The dimensions matched up with historical records of the Samson, with the newly discovered ruins measuring 100 feet, 30.5 meters long. But how did the wreck end up beneath a bustling urban center? Parts of Stockholm were underwater as recently as the 19th century, serving as ports for ships like the Samson, which disappeared in 1607, not long after it was built. Archaeologists believed that it languished in a port and was eventually stripped, abandoned, and covered in debris and garbage. As much as 2 centuries worth of trash may have piled on top of the ship before the flooded sections of Stockholm were drained during the 1800s. At the time the discovery was announced, the ship's identity had yet to be confirmed, but all signs point toward it being the Samson. Number 6. Gunilda. The luxury yacht Gunilda was built at the turn of the 20th century. A wealthy oil tycoon from Ohio named William L. Harkness bought it in 1903 and used it for leisure, first sailing around the Caribbean and then the Great Lakes. While touring northern Lake Superior with family and friends in 1911, he made the mistake of not hiring an experienced guide to help him navigate the nearly 200-foot-long, 61 meters boat through an area riddled with small islands and shoals. 2 experienced locals offered to do the job, but Harkness scoffed at their asking prices of $15 and $25. He proceeded full speed ahead without a guide and with no knowledge of the area. It was a decision he would soon come to regret. The Gunilda ran hard aground 5 miles, 8 kilometers from the coastal city of Rossport, Ontario, on a shoal near Copper Island. Hoping to save his yacht, Harkness hired a tugboat to tow it for repairs. He was advised to hire a second tug to keep the yacht stable, but he once again refused, and he would also come to regret this decision. After being pulled free, the Gunilda rolled over onto its side and sank 280 feet, 85 meters, to the bottom of the lake. In the years following its rediscovery in 1967, the Costuo Society described the Gunilda as the most beautiful wreck in the world. It's too deep for conventional diving, but a few seasoned pros have been lucky enough to see the perfectly preserved yacht firsthand. It looks practically the same as it did the day it went down, and is filled with remarkable artifacts, including furniture, a piano, some lanterns, and more. Sadly, the sinking of the Gunilda was entirely avoidable. It was a hard lesson learned for Harkness, who could have prevented the needless disaster by trusting the experts to get his yacht safely from point A to point B. Number 5. The MS Zenobia. The Swedish-built ferry MS Zenobia began her maiden voyage to Syria in May 1980 with 104 tractor-trailers of cargo aboard. After passing through the Strait of Gibraltar a few weeks later and stopping in Greece, the captain encountered steering problems. Soon enough, the ship began listing. The crew discovered excess water in the ballast tanks and pumped it out. They continued toward Cyprus, assuming they had solved the problem. But by the time Zenobia reached the port at Larnaca, it had started listing again. Engineers determined that a software problem was pumping excess water into the tanks. Worried that the 571-foot-long, 174 meters ferry was a danger to other ships, local authorities ordered the captain to leave the harbor. He anchored offshore and the list worsened, forcing the crew to abandon ship. They returned to the harbor where witnesses claimed they drank at a bar and watched calmly as Zenobia capsized. It took $200 million worth of cargo down with it and scattered 100 trucks onto the seafloor. Zenobia is the largest ship to ever sink in the Mediterranean. The crew's unfazed behavior was strange, but things got even weirder when no investigation of the incident was carried out. The ferry's owners never filed an insurance claim, and the cargo was never salvaged. Police suspected that Zenobia was sabotaged. One theory proposes that it was wrecked by British and Israeli secret services, who suspected that it was carrying an illegal arms shipment for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO. Unfortunately, we may not ever know what happened. The wreck is one of the world's most popular diving sites, attracting over 100,000 visitors every year. Would you be interested in exploring this incredible underwater shipwreck yourself? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel while you're there. Number 4. The Prines Eugene. The Prines Eugene entered service at the beginning of World War II as a Nazi naval warship. In 1946, the US took the vessel as a war prize and moved it to the waters off Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The American military nuked the Prines Eugene twice, along with dozens of other ships, in a series of tests codenamed Operation Crossroads. The vessel was only lightly damaged, but the experiment had rendered it dangerously radioactive. After several failed decontamination attempts, the Navy towed the Prines Eugene to Kwajalein Atoll and awaited further instructions. In the meantime, the ship began to take on water. It capsized and sank 6 months later while being towed for repairs, landing upside down on the sea floor. The ship is still visible today in the shallow waters off Inubuj Island, where its propellers can be seen protruding from the surface. In 1974, experts warned that the Prines Eugene would leak oil into the South Pacific if it wasn't removed within 30 years. The US Army, the Navy, and the Micronesian government worked together in 2018 to pump all the oil out of the ship's fuel tanks. By then, the environment and the local population had already suffered plenty from the effects of radiation left behind by nuclear tests. Removing the oil was an imperative part of a long overdue effort to protect both wildlife and humans. Number 3. The Hilma Hooker. The crew of the Dutch-built freighter Hilma Hooker had no idea they were being watched by law enforcement when the ship ran into engine problems in the Caribbean Sea back in 1984. Unaware of the problems they were about to encounter, they had the vessel towed to the port city of Kralendijk on the island of Bonaire. The captain couldn't furnish the proper registration documents, sparking a search by the authorities, who found 25,000 pounds, 11,000 kilograms of marijuana hidden in a false bulkhead. The suspects were detained, but the Hilma Hooker's owner was never identified. Perhaps whoever it was knew that there might be trouble and was smart enough not to come forward. In the meantime, the ship deteriorated and began taking on water as it sat, neglected as evidence. By then, the authorities were sick of continuously pumping water out of it, and they were worried that it would sink at the city's main dock and disrupt maritime traffic. They towed the Hilma Hooker elsewhere, and within days, it began to list. Not long after that, the 236-foot-long, 72 meters vessel rolled onto its side and sank to the sea floor. Today, it sits 95 feet, 28 meters underwater on a sand flat between two coral reef systems. The Hilma Hooker is one of the most popular diving sites in the Caribbean due to the crystal clear visibility of the water, although most of the ship's interior is off limits. Number 2. The Vasa. The Vasa was the world's most high-tech warship when she set sail on August 10, 1628. Commissioned by Swedish King Gustav II Adolf, the beautifully decorated vessel was covered in ornate wooden carvings and had 64 bronze cannons. But Vasa's glory was incredibly short-lived. Minutes into her maiden voyage from Stockholm Harbor to the Swedish island of Avsnaben, she sank to a watery grave just 390 feet, 120 meters from land. A combination of engineering flaws and heavy winds quickly brought the ship down as hundreds of horrified spectators looked on from the shore. The disaster claimed 30 lives. An attempt was made to raise the wreck shortly after the sinking, but the vessel had come to rest in the mud and became even more stuck during the process. The Swedish government raised the ship along with thousands of artifacts in 1961. Thanks to the Baltic Sea's cold, oxygen-poor water, which prevents shipworms and bacteria from thriving, the wreck was in remarkable shape. At the time of recovery, around 95% of Vasa's wood remained intact. It's the only preserved 17th century vessel in the world, according to the Vasa Museum in Stockholm, where it's on public display. There are several theories about what exactly caused the Vasa to sink. The king had rushed the building process, and the vessel was designed by someone who had no experience with armed ships. Consequently, its gun deck was far too heavy. It also had very little resistance to changes in the wind or waves. Although the Vasa never accomplished anything noteworthy in its very short time on the water, it lives on as an iconic symbol of Swedish heritage. Number 1. Mary Rose. King Henry VIII commissioned the Tudor warship Mary Rose in 1510 as part of his effort to establish a standing navy. The vessel served in wars against France, Scotland, and Brittany. After being launched in 1511, the Mary Rose saw her last action 34 years later, in 1545, while leading an attack against a French invasion fleet. She sank in the strait between the British mainland and the Isle of Wight, an island in the English Channel. Numerous failed attempts were made to raise the Mary Rose over the centuries. The shipwreck was rediscovered yet again in 1971. It was raised by the Mary Rose Trust in 1982 in one of history's most complex and costly maritime recovery projects. Over 26,000 artifacts were collected, including weapons, naval equipment, sailing supplies, musical instruments, and the remains of around half the crew members. A bone analysis revealed that the sailors were malnourished and suffered from a host of conditions, including arthritis, scurvy, and rickets. The Mary Rose and its contents are a fascinating time capsule that offers a rare glimpse at life during the Tudor era. They are on public display at the Mary Rose Museum in Portsmouth, England. That's all for today.
Number 10. The Hartsville Nuclear Plant. The Hartsville Nuclear Plant is a creepy and oddly silent conglomeration of concrete buildings throwing shadows over the small town of Hartsville, Tennessee. Back in 1975, the Tennessee Valley Authority broke ground on the power plant, thinking they'd be able to fill their electrical needs in the coming centuries. At the time, this was an ambitious project. It would have been the largest nuclear power plant in the world. The sleepy town of Hartsville boomed, the population spiked, new businesses flourished, and everything was going just swell. But within 10 years, a decision was made from the higher-ups to stop the project. The result was the entire town falling apart. What was almost an industrial capital of America turned back into a slow and rural community. But nobody ever came to take down the giant cooling tower that was built. The creepy thing now stands there as if it's the backdrop for some post-apocalyptic movie. Number 9. Romania's abandoned crematorium. There's a very creepy abandoned crematorium in Romania where people were turned into ashes for decades. It's called the Sanusa Crematorium, and it's one of the oldest anywhere in the Balkans. It was built in 1928 and closed its doors forever in 2002. The thing with Romania is that less than 1% of their population are cremated upon death. Cremations in Romania are so rare that it's surprising this one lasted as long as it did. In the capital of Bucharest, there's only a single functioning crematorium for the 2 million people that live there. The reason is that Romanians are mostly Christian Orthodox, meaning they want their bodies to be preserved so that they can be resurrected when Jesus comes back. If your body is nothing but ash, how are you supposed to rise from the grave at the Last Judgment? In any case, after the Sanusa Crematorium was closed, nobody ever bothered to clear anything out or demolish the building. It's just been sitting there collecting dust for about 20 years now. The kids who grew up in the region have even created ghost stories and urban legends surrounding the creepy place. They say there are secret tunnels underneath the facility and that anyone who goes inside never comes out. The truth is that the crematorium is just a crematorium, although definitely disturbing. The burial chamber is still there, the altar room, all of the urns used to collect the ash of the dead bodies, and yes, the stove where the coffins were slid gently into a roaring fire. Number 8. Lost Library. The Hyde Library in Manchester opened back in 1899. After just over 100 years of service, the place was abandoned in 2015. It wasn't that people stopped reading books, but that everything was moved to a new location. Since then, the building has fallen apart. In only 6 years, what was once a proud library now looks like a great location for a horror movie. The glass is shattered, the walls are peeling, the floor appears to be bubbling, and even the ceiling is missing some of its pieces. Plus, somebody left books behind. There are books and pages strewn across the floor, broken coffee mugs, and even one room filled to the brim with fire extinguishers. According to the local Metro News, the public and the Manchester Council have tried to renovate the building, but nothing has come through yet. It's probably going to be condemned in the next few years. Number 7. A Victorian morgue. An urban explorer broke into a British morgue that has been abandoned for over 50 years. The morgue is located in South Wales, with it originally opening way back in 1790. It operated for just about 200 years until being forced to close in 1960. Since then, it's remained deserted and out of bounds. It became such a creepy place to the local townsfolk that nobody was willing to go in and refurbish the structure. So it was just forsaken and ignored. What did the brave urban explorer find when they broke in? Well, exactly the kind of stuff you'd guess. First of all, though, breaking in was not easy. The morgue is still sitting on the grounds of an active insane asylum. He had to climb over the fence in the middle of the night so he could take spooky pictures of the inside. The mortician's table is standing in a room where bodies were cut apart and dissected for 17 decades. Somebody even left their boots behind when the place shut down. and there were medical aprons hanging on hooks as if people were coming back at any minute to perform an autopsy. Do you think you'd ever be so brave as to break into a Victorian morgue in the middle of the night by yourself? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking the video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. The Horton Mine. The Horton Mine in Nevada is not somewhere you want to get lost. It dates back to the 1800s and is one of the creepiest mines still accessible throughout the Nevada desert. Oh, and it also happens to be just a little bit haunted. Specifically, the ore removal tunnel that was once used by miners to bring the precious cargo out from deep within the earth is filled with creepy whispers. In 2013, a man named Frank decided to do a bit of exploring inside the mine, which is absolutely not allowed. Before long, he encountered chains hanging from the ceiling, looking like some kind of horrible underground torture chamber. And then there came the whisper, very much sounding like somebody trying to communicate from beyond the grave. But of course, there was nobody in the tunnel, except for Frank. Frank left in a hurry. Then in 2014, another person decided to investigate the mine. This time it was a spelunker with many years of experience exploring mines. They encountered the same phenomenon of somebody whispering to them as they descended into the darkness of the mine shaft. It could be the spirit of a dead miner. It could also be the devil himself. There's just no way of knowing. And to be honest, you'd have to be crazy to explore this place on your own. Number 5. St. Mary's Church. St. Mary's Church in East Somerton, England is ancient and not actually that creepy during the day. Sure, there's a giant tree growing out of the floor and the stone walls have been overtaken by weeds and moss and shrubbery, but it's actually pretty peaceful in the daytime, looking like a scene out of a fantasy TV show. But underneath the oddly serene exterior is a world of horror. The romantic ruin dates back to the 15th century, though it only lasted another 200 years before falling into disuse in the 17th century. Since then, the church has been totally abandoned. Now, remember the tree I talked about earlier, the one growing out of the floor? It's actually known to the locals as the witch's leg. The oak tree, according to legend, grew out of a dead witch who was allegedly buried alive inside the church. While historical records can't confirm this, it wouldn't be all that surprising. A lot of witches were burned in those days, and a lot of them were buried alive as well. The story says that the witch enchanted her wooden leg so that it would sprout a tree and destroy the church later on. It's also said that if you walk around the tree 3 times, the witch's spirit will be released. Oh yeah, and some people say the church is haunted at night by monks who are charged with preventing people from walking 3 times around the tree. Number 4. Diligence Children's Amusement Park. Diligence Children's Amusement Park is a creepy throwback to when Armenia was a Soviet Socialist republic. The park is filled with rusting rides, dead dragon statues, and even a ruined pirate ship. The location of the decaying amusement rides, the Diligent National Park, has a long and interesting history. It was a spa town for comrades of the USSR. In even older days, it was a retreat for painters and writers. And in even older days, it was a summer sanctuary for the kings of Armenia. Today, the national park is quiet and peaceful. The end of the communist era was the end of the children's park. It's being retaken by nature one ride at a time, as nobody has cut the grass in decades. But perhaps the creepiest part about this place is that there are weird paintings from Russian fairy tales that can still be found everywhere. For example, there are still paintings from the Adventures of Buratino. This is the Russian version of Pinocchio. In this other version, Pinocchio never turns into a real boy. For the Russians, the story was a hard lesson in accepting your miserable position in life. Number 3. Communist Monument of Bulgaria. There's a strange monument high up in the snowy mountains of Bulgaria. The reason it's strange? Well, there are many reasons. First of all, it looks like a UFO that landed on the peak of the mountain. Second of all, it's not a UFO at all, but a communist monument built in 1981 for about $7 million. It was supposed to be a symbol of communism and its triumph in the Balkans. Bulgaria built it on top of their Bozluja mountain at a height of about 4,500 feet. But not long after the communist UFO was installed on the mountain, it was abandoned. We all know what happened to the communists and the Soviet Union in the 1990s. With the Soviet collapse, this structure became less of a monument and more of a strange tourist attraction. It's now a creepy piece of communist nostalgia at the end of a pretty stunning hike. Spooky, captivating, and majorly weird. Number 2. The Mulbi Castle. The Mulbi Castle can be found in Belgium, originally built in 1860 and occupied until extremely recently in 2007. Locals say the castle is haunted. They say at least 2 children have gone missing while exploring the ruins of the castle. And apparently a man was found dead on the property and his killer was never identified. At least, that's what the locals say. But even if nobody was killed and nobody went missing, the castle is still extraordinarily creepy. It has 344 windows and sits on 62 acres of land. It also has dozens of rooms that appear to have been abandoned overnight. There's a study with writing books spilling off the shelves, a child's room with creepy toys that look like they've been in there since the 1800s, and room after room of dusty, antique furniture. It's a total mess inside the castle, which is actually a little sad considering its historic value. It's believed the castle was built over top of the bones of an old fortress from the 1500s, but now it's just a big spooky house filled with a lot of trash. Number 1. Wilkes Bar Train Station. The Wilkes Bar train station was abandoned by the coal industry and then turned into a cocktail bar. But don't worry, it was abandoned pretty much immediately after the cocktail bar ran out of customers. The actual city of Wilkes Bar was like any other mining settlement in Pennsylvania. It was a booming town until the 1970s when the mine just wasn't profitable anymore. The city was gradually abandoned, but the railway station held on surprisingly long. Even though the trains weren't running anymore, a clever entrepreneur began to sell cocktails out of it. But alas, everyone fled the town and there was no one left to buy the cocktails. The train station is now a ghostly ruin from a time largely forgotten. Nobody's taken care of it in decades. It's dark and the lights are off, and the only thing creepier than the lurking shadows is the ugly graffiti left all over the walls. The only good news is that in 2016, a developer did buy the property and is hoping to restore the abandoned train station to its former glory. But we'll just have to wait and see if that actually happens. Which of these creepy places would you be brave enough to visit by yourself in the dead of night? Let us know in the comments, and thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more awesome videos right here on American Eye.